Hi, my name is Bernard Pucher, and welcome to CenterFrame's Make It Short, which is a show where we give constructive feedback to filmmakers from all around the world. And joining me today is Diogo Brigman, a Brazilian journalist and film critic. Thank you very much for joining us on our show today.
Thank you.
And what's the show that we have on today? What new films have you brought us?
Yeah, today we're going to talk about LGBTQ plus films from all over the world, so I can't wait to see how it goes.
Okay, nice. So, and also joining me here in the studio is Deborah Espect. Did I get that right? Espect?
That's right.
Fantastic, I got the name right. Obviously, Deborah, you are a writer, director, and producer, but also a TV presenter at Latest TV in Brighton, and actually run a few festivals, including
Film Pride.
Film Pride. I just left it to you there. Including Film Pride, it's been running for 4 years now.
That's right. So Film Pride is Brighton's LGBTQ plus film festival. As you said, it's our fourth year, and this year we were actually part of Brighton and Hove Pride. We had the 10th at Pride, which was fantastic. But as well as offering live events to our filmmakers, what we do, which is a little bit different to other film festivals, is that we also have shows on TV stations in the country, in the UK.
Nice.
So our festival is broadcast on Latest TV in Brighton, on Northern Visions in Belfast, KMTV in Kent, and Sheffield Live in Sheffield. So as well as obviously having the live events, we offer our filmmakers the opportunity to be seen by thousands more people on TV.
That's brilliant. I love that. That's really awesome. And also, it's nice to hear something happening on traditional media. Do you bring short films to the TV station as well, or do you have a show you're working on that for by any chance?
Yes. So as well as Film Pride, and as you said, there's also 3 other film festivals that I manage, and actually those film festivals are purely TV festivals.
Right.
So coming up next, we've got a Halloween festival, which is going to be on the
Of
TV
course.
channels that I mentioned, and then we're going to have a festival for International Women's Day next year as well. And we also have an environmental festival which runs 3 seasons per year. So we've just had the summer season that finished last month. We've got a winter edition, and we're back to spring next year. And we've also got some shows in the pipeline where I'll be introducing indie filmmakers and their films as well with Q&As.
Nice. That's brilliant. That's so great. I love it that you're so like active and doing so many projects, and you're writing, directing as well, which is really cool. So we'll talk about more about your films later on if you want. But first, let's get into our first film. What's our first project, Diogo?
Okay, so the first short film that we have today is called Buddy. It's a film directed by Neus Borgonha. I think I'm pronouncing that quite wrong, but it's Dutch. So it tells the story of 2 ex-boyfriends who see each other again after some time, after their relationship has come to an end, and they are on a health clinic because one of them is doing an HIV test. Well, besides that situation, we also learned that there are some unresolved issues between this couple, which get tangled up in this moment that's pretty tense because, of course, as a lot of other people, when you go to STD or STI clinic to test yourself, you always have, some fears of the news that you might receive on that day. And as queer people have this long history with HIV, I thought that that moment was chosen very wisely because it just makes everything much more intense and much more powerful. So that's why I chose this film, and I think it's got great acting as well, very interesting use of camera. So we have a lot of things to talk about it.
That's really amazing. I mean, I really enjoyed this film. I have to say, for me, it is all the things that I love about good writing, about good performances, about a good premise. Like, it does all those things incredibly well. What was your sort of first impression watching the film?
I completely agree. I thought it was a fantastic film. I thought it was very dramatic. I felt that the story was universal. It was about 2 men, but it could have been about 2 women. It could have been about a man and a woman, non-binary couple, or different gender. It doesn't matter. It's universal. It's about a heartbreak. It's about trying to maybe be friends afterwards, or whatever happens after you've broken up with
It
someone.
could have been
trying
about
to get
cancer.
over them.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. It didn't. It was about HIV or another STD or STI. Or it could have been about anything. And as you said, I love the subtleties, the nuances, what's not being said, and the ambiguity of it at first as well. It was just a brilliant film.
I completely agree. Let's actually talk to Niels. Let's bring Niels on the call, and then we'll find out some more about how he made the movie. Well, Niels, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us at Make It Short, and really appreciate having had the privilege to watch your film. I think we all universally here really loved the project. But what I'd really love to know from you is how the project came about. Like, what was the inspiration behind it, and sort of when you shot it and how you made it.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a movie I made a couple of years ago already, so it's fun to talk about it and to reminisce. So I'm so lucky you guys found it. I made Buddy together with my producer Edwin Goldman, and it was inspired by a story that actually happened to him. So he was in an STD clinic with his ex-boyfriend, and he says it was his first time at an STD clinic, so I assume that that's true. And he wrote a script and he sent it to me, and he said, like, I want you to direct this. And I was really touched by the story. I did ask him if I could rewrite the script to make it feel like I understood the characters and the story beats, and he let me, and together we made the short film.
That's amazing. That's really cool. So, did you do a full pass on it, or did you only change small things? Like, how was your adaptation process? How did you lend your voice to it?
Well, because it's a very autobiographical story for him, I needed to find a way for me to understand what the story was. And I was thinking about it for a while. And then it dawned on me that I had a similar situation where I met up with an ex in the train when I was on my way from one part of Holland to the other part of Holland. And we were sitting next to each other, not having seen each other for, well, at least 3 months after we broke up, and we started talking, and then I realized everyone is listening to our conversation, so I can't ask the questions that I really wanted to know. So we just had this conversation. It wasn't really about anything, but if you listen closely, you would actually see that there's a lot of emotion in that conversation. And when I had that memory, I immediately understood what the story was.
Right, that's perfect. That's really great, and for me, it just made the story much more universal taking that approach because it didn't make it. It didn't matter that it was an LGBTQ couple or a straight couple or anything. Like it could have been between an ex-husband and ex-wife that were married for 30 years. Like it is a completely a universal trauma of having an ex and encountering them again. And I thought that was a great approach to the whole thing. Do you have any questions, Deborah?
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions, and because basically I wanted to find out more about them. I wanted to know their backstory. I wanted to know so much more because I felt so much empathy, especially for the main character. So what I'm going to ask is really specific questions because I just want to know. So for
Of course.
instance, what was the character's new assignment? What's his job? Because they talk about this new assignment that he has with a new client. This is a very specific question, but I just wanted to know, what does he do?
Well, we talked about it that we didn't want him to be like working in film. We thought that would be a little bit on the nose, so we were looking for a creative endeavor, and we thought that he would work for like like a book agency, or that he was like that he worked with books. So either he was working at a publisher, or maybe he did something with advertising. To be honest, it's been a while since we shot the film, so I don't know what we agreed upon in the end, but I think he worked at a publishing house. I think that's sort of what we discussed with the actors.
So yeah, so the other question I had is when the ex says "I have," and then obviously he gets cut off. What was he going to say?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. So the theory was that the ex was actually going to be honest about that. Since they broke up, he was actually dating more guys. So we thought that that would be a good point for him to be honest, but then he gets cut off by that he needs to go to doctor. So yeah, we kept that vague. We thought it would be interesting to sort of like, now you're actually getting all the secrets out of me. I actually promised myself not to tell all of this, but the movie has been out for a while, so I guess I can finally say all of these things.
Diogo, any questions from you?
Yes, I have. I have so many questions, but there's one question that I really want to know, which is about the casting decisions. So because both actors they do such a great job, and I was watching and I felt for them, like really felt, and it's like only 10 minutes, and during those minutes, you get tangled in that relationship, and then you of course you identify with them because like most of us have been through one of those awkward, like you said, you had on the train. So I would like to know, how was the casting process to find these two actors?
Casting process is always a mixture of uh, a lot of overthinking and at the same time being incredibly lucky because when we wrote the script, I actually envisioned the characters to be older. So we were actually looking for actors who were in their mid 30s. And we spoke to a couple of actors. A couple of actors were interested. We almost had two completely different actors, and then one of them couldn't do it, and then we felt the other one was too old. So then we decided on Daniel, who I think is one of the best Dutch actors we have, and we just tried to find the right actor that would complement him because, like Tobias, the actor who plays the other role, is very different from Daniel. But we thought it would be interesting to have two polar opposites because you often see that in couples as well, that you have these two very different personalities. You also needed to understand why they ended up not, succeeding in their relationship. So I also wanted that contrast to exist. And we were very lucky because Daniel and Tobias, they've known each other for like at least 10 years. So they're really great friends. And I think that comes across because you really felt that there was history between them. So I wish I could, say that it was just beautifully directed, but it was just also just very, very lucky with these amazing actors. So yeah, I just got very lucky.
Diogo, anything else?
Yeah, and well, I was telling them before that the idea that it happens in a clinic, in an STD clinic, STI clinic, was really something that a lot of queer people have gone through. Like I have been tested so many times. Of course, everybody should test. So this is for everyone. It's a universal story, and but we know the trouble story that queer people have with HIV, and so this was really impactful to me. So I wanted to know if the idea of, well, at the end of the story, this is a spoiler, we know that he tested negative, right? But at some point, have ever crossed your mind that he could have tested positive or something like that?
Well, we always knew that he wouldn't test positive, but I think what was interesting about this story is that the main character, obviously, he's not hoping that his ex is going to have AIDS, but I sort of amused this idea in my head that if that would be the case, he would have a big part in his life again because he could be the buddy. That's kind of where the title came from. So then he could be the one who can take care of his ex and still have a role in his life that he currently doesn't have. It's funny because now that we're reminiscing, I remember that the first title for the script, so the script that I got from the producer, was called The Silent Killer, which I always thought like sounded like a 70s horror film. And then we were talking about it, and we basically came up with this conclusion that our main character, he definitely doesn't want his ex to have HIV, but I think he sort of entertains the idea of, if it happens, I'm the right person to help him with this. And then we thought Buddy was actually the perfect title to have for this story. But we never like the ending was always the same.
What I really liked so much about how this narrative builds is that you balance the dramatic requirements for the characters along with the plot reveals really, really well. Like that comes out bit by bit really nice. You never explain anything in detail or anything like that, but the implications of all the actions are so strong that it doesn't take much to figure out where they are, why they are where they are, what that they're exes, that they're struggling to keep up, that even the ex that shows up struggles being there with him, but knows he's the only one he can trust to turn to, and so that's why he does this. And of course, our main character gets his hopes up for that, and so I really like that you have a very strong, a subtle balance between the character's needs and how the story unfolds. And one of my two favorite moments in it, which I think were really lovely little touches, was one, that lie about the bike, because
Mm,
it was a necessary lie. Yeah, I mean, it was
yeah.
and it he could have not lied, but for him it was necessary. Yeah, I mean, it was
Yeah.
necessary for him to say, no, this is my separation now. Yeah, I mean, I'm done with it, and it's this small the other one was this moment of heartbreak when he finds out about the other partners. You have this
Yeah.
really delicate close-up which says everything. And I have to
Yeah.
say, like, it's really, really strongly put together in that, and it's the touches are just really well balanced, and it all suits the pace and things like that. So I have to say, high praises on that, on all that from my part. So as a director, quite envious on that one.
Well, thank you so much.
I'd love to hear from you. If you had the chance to go back, would you change
Mhm.
something? Or at the time, would you have changed something compared to 2 years, 3 years later, now that it's been a while? Like, is there something where if you wish you could change something, would you?
Yeah, it's a hard question because I think when we made it on a very low budget, and it shows. It's not the prettiest film I've shot. Like it's a very like realistic, almost like documentary type feel. The location is very light. It doesn't have as much contrast as I would normally put in a film, but at the same time, I think because the movie wasn't too technical, I was really focused on directing the actors and sort of like creating an intimate atmosphere. So I I remember having discussions with the producer, like, yeah, we have to shoot it and anamorphic and all these things. But then now I'm like, it's a good thing we didn't, because then we probably would have lost a few amazing takes because it wasn't quite sharp, or and we had like a very like a pretty strict plan the way that we wanted to shoot it. Like we were very much inspired by Blue Valentine, which I think is an amazing
I was
film.
going to ask if
And
that's in there, because that's
yeah,
you can see the influence for sure.
right, yeah. And I'm very curious because now I remember in the edit, I was like, oh my God, we're never going to get people to actually be invested in this, because I thought we were going to be too conceptual with the camera work. And actually, I sort of realized that if you're not a filmmaker, you don't really pick up on what we're doing with the camera work. But I'm very curious to hear like a director's opinion of it, and if you could sort of see what we were doing with the camera work.
Well, I had one. I watched it once, so
Mm,
to really break it down, I'd need to study it a bit more than what I did. But one
yeah.
thing that I really liked about it is that, from a simple storytelling perspective, I think uh, you didn't go over flashy. Yeah, I mean, I think
Hmm.
that would have ruined the intimacy of the story. Yeah, I mean, so when you
Yeah.
said anamorphic, I was like, oh no, I'm so glad you didn't do that. You know what I mean? Because
Hmm.
it needed to be far more intimate than an anamorphic lens that's great for
Yeah.
big vistas, and you are in this tight corridor, and and also it would have been not necessarily wrong, but it wouldn't have been
Mm.
appropriate. Yeah. And sure, you can tell intimate stories with anamorphic too, but I think you made the right choice to stick with spherical, to stick with I don't remember now if it's a 235 frame. I don't think it is. It's a 16:9
No.
frame, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the right frame for this. In fact, a 4:3 frame would have been just as appropriate for this film. And I think another thing that stuck out for me, it's not too overt, but there's a lot of perspective, of our
Mm.
main character looking at other people, and I thought that was also a really important part to the story, is that we're telling his story. It's him looking at his phone, when he's typing, when he should be paying attention to the guy that was just with him, which is another lovely little touch, of our guy, of the ex, ignoring the very guy that just helped him through this potentially traumatic moment, being immediately, oh, I gotta text the other people. You know what I mean? And it shows why the relationship ended. You actually gave us the reason. Everything before that was just awkward. Now here's the reason. This is why it ended, and that's why he lies. And I thought that was great. It was really, really well done, well thought through, and I'm glad you kept it subtle, and that the small budget that you had, actually forced you to make better decisions, than what you would have maybe done with a bigger budget.
Yeah, I'm so glad that like when I was editing it, I told my editor like, "Oh my God, we made a movie that's way too conceptual for anyone to actually get invested in emotionally." Because what we basically did was at the start of the film, these two main characters, they're exes, but they're not really in each other's worlds anymore. So basically, we shot them through long lenses. Either one or the other was out of focus, and we have this almost like until like the halfway mark in the film where the ex comes out of the doctor's office. There's this confrontation and then a reconciliation, and then slowly you'll see them for the first time in focus in the same shot, and then we cut to the most wide shot, which is where they're waiting together, where our main character is giving him coffee. It's the most wide shot of the film, and they're both in focus. You finally feel like, oh, these two characters are in each other's worlds. And then we go to the doctor's office. You hear the news about the exes, and then you cut to that close-up that you were talking about earlier, where we have the most extreme long lens shot of the film. And now when I'm watching the film, like, why isn't nobody like telling me like I'm a horrible director for making it so incredibly obvious? But luckily, it's something that as a director you're constantly looking at and like, oh my God, why is nobody picking this up? But I guess it's working then. So I'm glad it is.
I would agree with that. Sorry if I'm like keeping you here. I'm just gonna elaborate on this a little bit further. I think the to my mind, good cinema language is something that your brain notices but you don't notice unless you're a craftsman where you're looking for it. The rest of the time it's in the brain notices the storytelling subconsciously. The subtlety of your camera work let us stick with the characters and not behold the shot. The approach you did take was extremely effective for the narrative you told, and if you had gone down the Stanley Kubrick route, it would have been the wrong route. Does that make sense?
Like
So
I don't mind being compared to Stanley Kubrick, but
yeah.
I know what you mean. Like
Exactly. Now,
it's interesting
conceptually
because
speaking, I think your aesthetic was exactly the right one.
yeah, it's interesting because like some filmmakers might think it's too on the nose, and other filmmakers might think it's too conceptual. But I think at the end of the day, you have to have like a clear idea of what the development is. And if you have a clear idea of what the development of the character is and of the story, then you have to find a way to visualize it. So, and that's kind of what we try to do. And I think as long as if you make choices based on what's happening from a development standpoint instead of just a cool shot, then I think you're on the right path.
Completely agree with that. Any more thoughts on the film from you?
No, I mean, I would. I'm probably going to be paraphrasing what you've just said, but Niels, yeah, I think I didn't go to film school. I'm a self-taught director, so I don't know the techniques, the camera techniques, or the language. But for me, I watched it from an audience perspective, and to me, the camera work, whatever names, the angles or whatever, it really worked. I think it didn't distract me from what was going on. I was drawn in and I was watching these characters, and the fact that you were worried that maybe it looked a bit too much like a documentary, to me actually that's a good thing because we're witnesses to these two people's experience. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. I think it was, again, I'm not gonna keep praising you, but I wouldn't worry. I think you've done a really, really fantastic job.
Diogo, any more thoughts from you?
Well, I just have one more question. I want to know what's next for you. What are you doing right now? What you're working on? Tell us.
It's funny. I'm more in the horror genre at the moment. So I made a couple of horror shorts, and one of them is called Swipe, and it was picked up in Hollywood actually because we're working with a producer to make a feature version out of it. So we're currently developing it with a writer, and so that's very nerve wracking but fun at the same time. So I'm traveling back and forth between Amsterdam and LA to hopefully get that off the ground. There's
That's
another
amazing.
project, yeah, another feature project called The Interventionist, which is a blacklist script that I'm currently attached as a director, which again is a horror film. But all of these projects are at the same time they're horror, but they they both have like a big social message, and I think that horror is a really interesting genre to tackle those type of subject matters, especially like ever since like a movie like Get Out, it's easier to sell the idea that a horror film isn't just about scares, but you can actually tell something about society. So lately, I've actually been very involved with that. So I have a new short film coming out called Shut, which is going to premiere in a couple of weeks, actually. So again, nerve wracking, and we're going to see how that one does. And I'm going to be back in LA in October. So again, more beautiful weather. So I can't complain.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the call. It was a pleasure talking to you, and congratulations on all your success so far. Fingers crossed those projects come off the ground. It's not easy in Hollywood. I have a few friends that have been struggling there for years, but I've got all my fingers crossed for you. It sounds great, and I'm big on horror movies too, so I can't wait to actually see your first one. Let us know when you have it done, so we can talk about that again. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, no, hopefully I can be back and then talk about that one. No, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for introducing Buddy to a whole new audience. So I'm very excited to hear all of the response. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Well, that was really great. I really like Niels. I like his perspective on it. He clearly thinks a lot about the craft, along with the narrative. I think what's is always lovely to, I mean, I consider myself a very technical director. I really like thinking about the different lens choices, the different avenues of things. And it's always nice to hear a director really thinking through how they want to tell the story, how they want to progress from one to the next, and then really being considerate in the edit about these things. I love hearing that. I'm glad he did, because it shows in the film.
Yeah, I mean, and as I mentioned to him, I'm self-taught, and so when he started talking about lenses and things, he almost lost me, because I thought, well, I loved what I watched. It worked perfectly well for me. Why do it any different? But it's interesting because he's clearly very self-analytical, and he was clearly concerned. He thought about it, what could have done differently, which was really nice. It's nice to hear from a directors, maybe sometimes not necessarily insecurities, but how they could have done things different. Because I think it's very easy to become complacent. So it was really interesting to hear his thought process.
Aside from the moments we already talked about, are there moments that stuck out to you that you think were interesting and unique, other than the stuff that we discussed already?
Oh, I don't know, because these moments were for me the ones that really stood out, and I'd want to watch it again to try and find more now, to find other moments. But one thing that actually, you talked about language in terms of the camera work and the technicalities, but also in terms of actually the fact that it wasn't an English film. We talked about the subtleties, and actually that I don't think that got lost in translation, and that is sometimes the danger with films that get translated, and you miss some of it sometimes in translation. Of course, I don't know what the original would be like, but I could see the beauty in the writing and those subtleties, and I think that's very important, and it's a shame when that gets lost.
This performance was so, while it had dialogue, it was so wordless. I mean, it was all in the face, all in the eyes. They could have said gobbledygook. They could have said nothing. You know what I mean? The whole film could have been entirely silent. And that's actually one of the advices that I give to very new directors is that try to tell your story without words. I mean, what can you do it through actions alone? Can you make it understood? And only put the words in when you need to know things. And this film, as it could have been silent, and we would have understood most of it just fine. It rested entirely on the performances, and I think it was perfect for that. Diogo, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's one scene I think that exemplifies that very well. That's when they're waiting in the clinic, and there's another couple getting out of one of the doors, and they're smiling, they're happy, probably good news in the room. And we can see how jealous of that situation the protagonist is. Like, well, maybe, I wish I could be them because they seem to be together, right? And then here I'm in a situation where I'm with my ex, but that's like, we have no words there. We just see that with the camera work and with the acting, and that's pretty well done.
So let's do the next one. What's the next film?
Well, next film is called Valentin or Valentine. It's directed by Paul Marcus Duarte, and again, it's a drama. It's a story of a trans boy going for his first day at college, at the college dorm. So he's moving, and while he's doing all this moving into his new life, in his new room, he finds some photos and some memories of his past. And of course, with that, we get to see the transition, the gender transition that he went through, and how he was as a kid, as a teenager, And what I really liked about this film is that, of course, besides being beautifully shot, we also have here a more positive story. It's dramatic, it is. There are some, we know how queer people throughout their lives go through bullying and a lot of other problems. But here we have a supportive family at the end of the day that helps him go through his life, which is something we deserve to see more in trans and queer stories as a whole.
Yeah, I think I think the title is very clever. I think it's really good. I think there's some very nice little cues in there that showed what kind of movie it's going to be. I mean, obviously, I went in knowing it was going to be a film because I read the synopsis. I knew it was about that. But if you knew nothing about that, the hints of the transition come in, and I think it's a very, very smart use of both visuals and music, and it's a great example of great visual storytelling to advance a narrative, and because it's done in this long montage, and to go through that, and it makes sense that it's a montage too, because it is a box of photos. It is a reliving, it's a nostalgic moment. It's invoking that sort of emotion and nostalgia into looking back and where we've and how far they've come. So I thought that was a really, really strong use of the montage tool, and it did resolve in ultimately a scene, which I thought was a very interesting decision. I really enjoyed the film. I thought it was very well crafted. What were your thoughts on it?
It made me feel very emotional, and talking about it actually makes me feel quite emotional, because, as you said, Diogo, the obviously the queer community, but even more so the trans community, is persecuted left, right, and centre throughout the world, everywhere. People fighting for their rights to exist, fighting for their lives. So, as you said, Diogo, I mean, we, obviously, I've as a film programmer, I've seen a lot of films about the trans experience, and most of these films are about those struggles and about their plights for survival. And these films are really important, but this film is just as important, because it's a story of hope, it's a story of love and acceptance. And I actually cried watching it, and thinking, it just makes me feel really emotional, because it is such an important story, and it's just such a happy story, because it's about a family, and the fact that it's a French film as well. I'm French myself, and I will say to Paul, because I'd love to hear about Paul's experience of being of living in France, and the way that LGBTQ plus people are treated in France, because my experience of it, I moved away from France and moved to the UK when I was 18, and that was many moons ago, but at the time it was horrible being queer in France, and I think to a certain extent it still is, and I think it probably is even more so for the trans community. So this film is very important, and I'm so glad that I got to see it. And I really can't wait to speak to Paul about it.
Actually, let's do it. Let's get Paul on the call. Let's talk about it. Hi, Paul. Thanks very much for joining us on Make It Short. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thanks for letting us watch your film. It was really awesome to get a chance to watch it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about how you made the film. Like, what was the inspiration behind it? How did you get to it? What was the decision to make it? And also, it'd be good to know, what your decision making behind turning it into this montage narrative was. It'd be lovely to hear that.
Mm-hmm. So it's a project that I developed with my co-director Violet Giton, and together we wanted to participate in a contest called the HP Master of Short Films, and the theme was free. So we discussed a little bit, and we had this idea of making a film on a friend with Judy Kael, the main character of the film, the main actor. So we talked about it with him, and he explained a little bit about his transition. And so we wanted to make a short film, very short, on the transition, and that's it. We just wrote some ideas for sequences, and everything went quite fast, because we wrote it, shoot it, and edited it in less than 1 month.
Oh wow, that is fast.
Yeah, it is fast.
So the inspiration came straight from the actor that you were considering filming with. That's amazing. It was, I think, Deborah and I were talking a minute ago, that what was really nice about it is that it actually gives a positive story of transition, a supportive family. While it wasn't all like rosy and all great, but it was actually an encouraging experience, and I thought it's something you don't see too often in short films, that you actually focus on the positive aspect of it, because you usually have to focus on the conflict and you focus on what it is. But this was less about the transition than it was about growing up with your family, you know. And I think the transition part was just that child's struggle, you know, but the conflict you have with family is universal, and I think that in itself made it very, very accessible. And I thought that was a really nice touch, that it wasn't, it was about a child's relationship to his parents, you know, to their parents in this case, you know. And I thought that, for me at least, as a straight white man, you know, made it extremely accessible and extremely universal, despite me understanding, of course, this is something that people that transition go through. uh, it was encouraging to see that this can be a simple human struggle like most teenagers can go through. And I really appreciated that approach. It is quite unique and quite novel. So I want to know how you got to that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're totally right. I guess Violette, the co-director, and I had seen a lot those kind of films with many conflicts and sharing how hard it can be with the family, with the people around you, with yourself sometimes. And we just wanted to share a story in a good way, to encourage it, and yeah, to make it also accessible to people who don't know anything about transgender. So the other idea was that, as the contest we wanted to apply to was by HP. It was about printers, those this little printer you see in the film. And so we were talking about the pictures that you can print, and we said, let's make a film where you have like some moments of his life. Just like when you see a wall of pictures, you remember those moments, and that's why the film is going so fast. And I think that in these moments you also have difficult moments. It's a little bit about being bullied. I don't know how to
Bullied,
say
yeah.
it. Bullied, yeah. There's also a moment with his father where he doesn't look at him in a way that he agree what he is becoming, and in the end we realize that it's better than that. But yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Yes, I was saying to Bernard and Diogo, bonjour Paul. So I found your film as, I mean, I'm a cis person, I'm a cis woman, but I am a trans ally and I'm part of the queer community. And your film moved me so much because, as you said, I'm a film programmer and I've seen a lot of films that, you know, talk about the plight, you know, the struggles of people with a trans experience and all the horrible things that happen. But it is so important to see stories like yours, because it is important to show that there is hope and that there is acceptance out there, and that family members can be supportive and can love you. And what I'm really interested to, because you are in France, right? You're not in Belgium or Switzerland. It is France that you're, yeah.
Okay, exactly.
So I'd be really interested to hear about your experience, and because I looked up your actor as well, and they are non-binary themselves, and I thought that was very important, because in casting, you know, authenticity these days is, at the moment, it's used as a buzzword, but it's a buzzword for a reason, because it's so important, especially within our community or any marginalized communities, to have the authenticity on screen. So to me, it was very important that your actor was non-binary, because of the experience that they were going through, that they were portraying. And yes, and I would be interested to find out about what it's like now in France to be part of the LGBTQIA community, because back in my time, many moons ago, it was really horrible. And I know the fight is not over, our struggles are still there, but what would you say? Is there hope for us in France?
Yeah, I believe there's hope everywhere, but I mean, I'm not transgender myself, so it's a bit hard for me to talk about it. But in the community, I see that some people are going in the good way, but it's not easy at all. That's why in this film we wanted to work with JDKL and to let him decide the way the story should go a lot. It's funny because it's a fiction, but it's a little bit of a documentary, because it was really connected to his ideas at this moment. When we shot the film, he was in transition to become a man, and right now he decided to be non-binary. And so we really followed his ideas, and he was able to say sometimes, okay, you want to shoot this scene, I think wouldn't go like that in the real life, or for me it wasn't like that. So I would enjoy if you make it differently. And yeah, it was a real connection between him and us today.
Diogo, do you have any thoughts?
I like to ask about one specific point close to the end of the film, that we have the bullying, right? And we all know, like me as part of the LGBTQ plus community, also have suffered bullying throughout my childhood and teenage years. And we know how that can scar you for life. And I loved that we can see the connection and the scar in the color blue, because when he's thrown things in the street, walking home, and then we see the color blue on the on his face as a kid, and then we see that he decides to dye his hair blue as well. We like there's a connection, and there's like a like moment of suffering transformed into something that kept him going, and becoming who he really wanted to be, right? So I loved that transition between the blue, and I would like to know what that where that idea came from.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So the idea came from, again, the HP thing with the printers and everything. We were talking about ink and how we can use ink in the film. And we wanted to show, yeah, something that happens that is bad and that is used in a good way to move forward. And so we imagine this scene where he gets ink in his face by some other students, and that he decides to use it to make color in his hair, and to come with the color and say, okay, you throw ink at my face, but now I'm blue, and that's it. And yeah, it was also a nice way of having mise en scène during the film with the hands coloring his hair. Yeah.
No, I think that is definitely a moment that stuck out to me as well. It's such a strong. I'm gonna own this moment. You know,
Yeah,
I just it's a very very touching moment. I think it's great that that you use that, because it's also very visual, and I think the strength of it is that it's visual, and that it doesn't get bogged down in arguments or in anything like that. It just says, no, these are moments in our lives, you know, just like the collage of pictures here, and this was a moment, and it was not just a moment, it was a defining moment. It was a decision. No, I'm owning this, I'm moving forward with this. You can't throw something at me. I'll just make it mine, and it won't hurt me, you know. I think that's great. It's a very very strong message to send.
Thanks so much.
I just wanted to get to I had just one last question for you, because I ask this of every filmmaker I bring on. How long ago have you made the film now? How long was it?
5 years ago.
Oh, 5 years. So it's been a little while. So you've grown as a filmmaker since then, I'm sure. If you could go back and change something about the film, if you could, and I know it's been 5 years, you don't think of the same flaws as you did at the time. Everybody always wants to change something because limitations, blah blah blah. But if you could go back and fix something that you wish you could get another shot of this, or something else that you think is missing, what would it be? What's the thing that's missing?
Well, it's hard to say. Probably delete the HP printers, because we did it for the contest, but we realized that this film was nice and could exist outside of the contest, and that's why I'm so happy to share it with you today, because we forgot at the time to send the film to many festivals. We did it just for the contest, and I think right now when I see this film 5 years later, I'm like, oh, I should show this film to some people, because it's still so real. And yeah, so I would delete these scenes and also maybe have a little bit more budget, because we did it with like €0. All the scenes were shot in the same house. Even at the end, when the kid is having his own flat, it's just in another room from the same house, and we had no budget at all, just running in 2 days to shoot all the film. But in the end, it works. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah.
I think what actually helps is the fact that it's 5 years old. I don't recognize that printer at all. It's out of date now, right? So it doesn't even matter anymore. So it's like Polaroids. You know what I mean? So I didn't find the printer distracting at all. I do remember wondering, I wonder what that is. I was like, it's just some photo printer. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like I didn't think of it. It was so tastefully handled that I never thought of it as a product advert, which I
Thank
thought is
you.
very well done. So, any more thoughts? Anything else you want to ask?
I just remembered actually the beginning, another thing that really stood out for me, which I really liked. I hadn't read the synopsis on purpose because I wanted to watch the film having no expectations at all. But when the character moves in, my first thought was, oh no, has he run away from home or something happened? And instantly I went on the negative, what's happened? And it was actually such a nice, it turned around and it was actually a really nice outcome. So that was a really nice surprise. What I would say though is, yeah, please send it to festivals because this film needs to be seen. And I say this as a film programmer. I mean, I would love to have it for my festival next year, and I'm sure a lot of other festivals would as well. So yeah, please consider submitting it.
Absolutely, it's totally worth doing. It's not aged at all, and who cares about the printer? You can leave it in; it's fine. Seriously,
And if it aged well, right? Because it's so nice to see the movie. Like, I watch it, I show it to some of my friends, all of them loved it. So, it aged very well if it did.
I hope so, because as it's a film that goes in the good way, I hope it won't age. It would mean that the world is still going in a good way for trans people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what we want, right? We want that a trans child has the same teenage experience as anybody else, and I love that this film does that. So well done on that.
You're right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate you coming down, and thank you for sharing your film with us. I appreciate it. And from all of us, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
I really enjoyed this film. I have to say, and I'm glad glad to hear you being very sort of emotionally touched by it. Did you watch it more than once? Did you?
I watched all the films twice.
Right.
To first, well, because I always do, especially when I have to think about them and critique them. So I watched it twice, and I watched it again, on the train this morning. But even just thinking about it now, it just really gets to me. And again, I don't know why, because I have seen so many films, but there's just something about this film. And I think the fact that, as I said to Paul, the fact that the actor is non-binary and they've obviously had a lot of input into the film telling their story, it just feels...
It shows.
Yeah, it shows. Yeah.
And you can see it. It feels genuine. Like these are not contrived moments, and I think that's really what sits at the heart of any story, that even if you don't necessarily there's a thing where people say, write what you know, right? I think more importantly is that you have to know what you write. You know what I mean? So while he is not transgender, he got somebody who does, and he listened and paid close attention and put the authentic information in there. While it's not their own lived experience, they got to take a lived experience and turn that into a compelling story. And I think you just have to know what it is. I mean, even if it's not your own, learn it, study it, feel it, and then put it in. And I think that's what they did here in this film. And as a congratulations to both of them for really, really pulling it off. All right. Well, I think that's it for our first episode of the LGBTQ films. So we've got these two, which are both fantastic films. They're really, really great. I have to say, I was thoroughly enjoying those two. And thank you for finding them, Diogo. Well done, because it was a pleasure also talking to both the filmmakers and to watch these films and discuss them with you guys. So thank you very much. Anything else you'd like to add about your shows and about the Film Pride?
So Film Pride runs in August as part of Brighton and Hove Pride, but we are planning some more events throughout the year. So if you check out filmpride.org, you will find all the information about future events.
And you've got your Halloween thing coming up, right?
We've got a Halloween festival, which will run the week of Halloween, and that's going to be on 4 local TV channels. As I mentioned, so it'll be Latest TV in Brighton, Northern Visions in Belfast, KMTV in Kent, and Sheffield Live in Sheffield. But what I didn't say is that you can also live stream all the shows anywhere in the world on the Latest TV website.
Fantastic. Also, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Diogo. Thank you for programming the show for us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for tuning in. I highly recommend you go to centerframe.com and sign up to our newsletter. We post quite a few of these shows. We also had the Get It Made competition, and we have more stuff coming up. We're also looking at finally opening up our community later in the year. So keep up to date with that, and join the conversation on our social media. What did you think about the films? Definitely make sure to check out the films. They're fantastic. And we actually have another episode coming up with Deborah, with Diogo, about LGBTQ films, but very, very different films from the ones we just saw today. So stick around for the next episode, and I guess I'll see you guys in a minute to do the others. So thank you very much. Join us on social media and check out the newsletter. I will see you next time.